What happens when the most dangerous person in the house is the one everyone trusts? When family isn't blood, but a carefully constructed lie. In the Golden Hills of Banana Island, Lagos, a billionaire family was being destroyed from the inside. Slowly. Quietly. Perfectly. And they had no idea. A man had entered their home 6 months ago. Charming. Helpful. Calling himself family. But beneath the smile was a plan, patient, calculated, and ruthless. He was there to take everything. And no one saw it coming, except for one person. The one person everyone overlooked. The one voice that didn't matter. A housemaid. This isn't just a story about deception. It's a story about courage in the shadows. About how the smallest voice can carry the loudest truth. And how sometimes, the person who saves your life is the one you never truly saw. Before the unmasking, the tears, and the truth, there was Grace. A poor housemaid with nothing but her eyes. And a billionaire family walking blind into a trap. Before we begin, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, hit like, and subscribe to Stories by the King, where every story carries a heartbeat, and every truth demands to be heard. Now, lean in. Because this story is about the woman who saw through the mask and risked everything to tear it off. The Okafor mansion sat on the hills of Banana Island like a crown of gold and stone. From the gates, you could see the Atlantic Ocean stretching endlessly, blue and unbordered. Inside, marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the air smelled faintly of imported roses and expensive perfume. But if you stood very still, in the quiet hours before dawn, you could feel it. The coldness. The emptiness. The cracks beneath all that shine. Grace Odeola knew this feeling well. She had worked in the mansion for 3 years, and she had learned to move through it like a ghost. Silent. Invisible. Necessary, but never seen. Grace was 24 years old, thin as a reed, with eyes that still held kindness despite everything life had taken from her. Her mother had died when she was 16. Her father, a mechanic in the village, sent her to Lagos with one instruction: survive. And so she did. She cleaned. She cooked. She swallowed her pride and her dreams and became a shadow in the house of Mr. Daniel Okafor, one of the richest men in West Africa. Daniel Okafor owned hotels, oil blocks, shipping companies. His wife, Victoria, wore diamonds like they were made of glass. Their son, Michael, was 12 years old, spoiled and sharp-tongued. Their daughter, Blessing, was 9, and sometimes, just sometimes, she smiled at Grace when no one was looking. But there was another person in the house. A man who had arrived 6 months ago and slipped into the family's life like oil into water. His name was Uncle Raymond. He was Daniel's older brother, or so everyone said. He was tall, well-dressed, soft-spoken, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He always had a kind word for Victoria, a gift for the children, and advice for Daniel. He had come during a difficult time, when Daniel's businesses were under investigation, when investors were pulling out, when the pressure was crushing him. And Raymond had been there. Supportive. Helpful. Family. But Grace had noticed something. The way Raymond watched Victoria when Daniel wasn't looking. The way he whispered to the lawyer who visited late at night. The way documents disappeared from Daniel's study and reappeared, slightly altered, on Raymond's desk. One evening, Grace was cleaning the hallway outside the study when she heard voices. Angry. Strained. She should have walked away. But something made her stop. Daniel's voice came through the door, tight with frustration. Raymond, I don't understand. The offshore accounts. I never authorized this. Raymond's voice was calm, almost soothing. Brother, you've been under so much stress. You signed those papers 2 months ago. Don't you remember? I was only trying to help protect the assets. There was a pause. Then Daniel, quieter now, uncertain. I don't remember signing anything like that. Raymond laughed softly. You've been working too hard, Daniel. You need rest. Let me handle things for a while. Trust me. Grace's hands tightened around the mop. She had seen those papers. She had picked them up from the floor of the study 3 weeks ago, late at night when Raymond thought everyone was asleep. She had seen Daniel's signature at the bottom, but something about it had looked wrong. Too smooth. Too perfect. She wasn't educated, but she had eyes. And in that moment, standing outside the door with her heart pounding, Grace knew. Uncle Raymond was not who he claimed to be. And the Okafor family, with all their wealth and power, was walking blind into a trap. She turned and walked away silently, her mind racing. What could a housemaid do against a man like Raymond? Who would believe her? And yet, she had to do something. Because in this house of glass and gold, she might be the only one who could see the shadows gathering. And they were closing in fast. Grace couldn't sleep that night. She lay on the thin mattress in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything she had seen over the past 6 months. The late-night meetings. The hushed phone calls. The way Raymond had slowly, carefully, wrapped himself around this family like a python around its prey. She thought about Victoria, who had started depending on Raymond for everything, who called him first now when problems arose, even before her own husband. She thought about Daniel, who looked more exhausted every day, more unsure of himself, as if his own mind was betraying him. And she thought about the children, innocent and unaware that their entire world was being stolen from beneath their feet. The next morning, Grace made a decision. She would gather proof. She began to pay attention in ways she never had before. When she cleaned Raymond's room, she looked. When she served tea during meetings, she listened. And slowly, piece by piece, the picture became clear. Raymond wasn't Daniel's brother. He was a con artist, a fraudster who had spent 2 years researching the Okafor family, learning their history, their vulnerabilities. He had forged documents, bribed officials, and created an entire identity. The real Raymond Okafor had died 15 years ago in a car accident. This man had stolen his name, his past, his face from old photographs. And now he was stealing everything else. Grace found the evidence hidden in a locked drawer in Raymond's room. She had watched him one morning, seen where he kept the key, tucked inside a book on the shelf. One afternoon, when the house was quiet and Raymond was out, she took the key with trembling hands and opened the drawer. Inside were documents. Bank transfers. Forged signatures. Legal papers that would transfer ownership of everything Daniel owned into offshore accounts controlled by Raymond. There were also photographs. Pictures of the Okafor family from years ago, newspaper clippings, research notes. This wasn't opportunism. This was a calculated, patient destruction. Grace's hands shook as she took photos of everything with an old phone she had saved for months to buy. She knew she was risking everything. If Raymond discovered what she had done, he wouldn't just fire her. A man capable of this level of deception was capable of far worse. But fate moved faster than Grace could. 2 days later, Daniel collapsed in his office. The doctor said it was exhaustion and stress, but Grace saw the empty cup of tea on his desk, the same tea Raymond had insisted on making himself that morning. She saw the way Raymond comforted Victoria, whispering that perhaps it was time to let him take over the businesses completely, just until Daniel recovered. She saw the lawyer arrive that evening with papers for Victoria to sign, her eyes red from crying, her hands shaking. And Grace knew she was out of time. That night, she did something she had never done before. She walked into the living room where Victoria sat alone, staring at nothing. Grace's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to speak. "Madam," she said softly. I need to tell you something. About Uncle Raymond. Victoria looked up, her face tired and tear-stained. Not now, Grace. But Grace didn't move. She pulled out her phone, her hands trembling. Madam, please. Just look. Please. Something in Grace's voice, something desperate and true, made Victoria pause. She took the phone. And as she scrolled through the photos, Grace watched the color drain from her face. The confusion. The disbelief. The horror. The silence in that room was deafening. Finally, Victoria looked up at Grace, and in her eyes was a question that didn't need words. Grace nodded. It's all true, madam. He's not who he says he is. And if you sign those papers tonight, you'll lose everything. Your husband will lose everything. Your children, everything. Victoria's hands began to shake. Then, with a strength Grace had never seen in her before, she stood. Where is he now? Grace swallowed hard. In the study. With the lawyer. Waiting for you. Victoria Okafor walked into the study like a woman made of steel. Grace followed behind, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Raymond stood by the window, relaxed, confident. The lawyer sat at the desk, papers spread out, pen ready. Raymond turned with his usual warm smile. Victoria, there you are. I know this is difficult, but these signatures are just a formality to protect Daniel's assets while he recovers. Nothing will change. I promise you. Victoria stopped in the center of the room. She didn't sit. She didn't smile. She simply looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. Who are you? She asked quietly. Raymond's smile faltered just slightly. Victoria, what do you mean? I'm Raymond. Your brother-in-law. I'm family. No, Victoria said, her voice growing stronger. The real Raymond Okafor died 15 years ago in a car accident on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. I know because I was there at his funeral. I held Daniel's hand while he wept over his brother's grave. The room went silent. The lawyer's pen stopped moving. Raymond's face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something cold and dangerous. Victoria, you're confused. The stress of everything. I'm not confused, Victoria interrupted. She pulled out Grace's phone and placed it on the desk. I've seen the documents. The forged signatures. The offshore accounts. The research you did on my family. I know everything. Raymond didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, the mask fell away. The warm smile vanished. His eyes went flat and hard. You shouldn't have done that, Victoria. He took a step forward. Grace felt fear shoot through her like lightning, but before anyone could react, the study door burst open. Daniel Okafor stood in the doorway, pale but steady, supported by 2 police officers. Behind them were more officers, and a woman in a dark suit who Grace would later learn was a federal investigator. Daniel's voice was weak but clear. I may have been drugged, Raymond. Or whatever your real name is. But I wasn't unconscious. I heard everything from the bedroom. Raymond's face twisted with rage. He lunged toward the desk, toward the papers, but the officers were faster. They grabbed him, pulled him back, forced his hands behind his back. He fought, cursing, spitting venom, all pretense of civility gone. You have no idea what I've sacrificed, he screamed at Daniel. You have everything. Everything handed to you. I had to claw and scrape and scheme. You don't deserve this life. Daniel just looked at him with something close to pity. I earned this through work and honesty. You tried to steal it through lies. That's the difference between us. As the officers dragged Raymond away, still screaming threats and justifications, Victoria collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief and shock. The lawyer quietly gathered his things and slipped out, wanting no part of what was to come. In the chaos, no one noticed Grace trying to back out of the room. But Daniel did. "Grace," he called out. "Wait." She froze. Turned slowly. Daniel crossed the room and stood before her, this billionaire in his silk pajamas, still weak from whatever poison had been in his system, and he looked at her with tears in his eyes. "You saved us," he said simply. "You could have stayed silent. You could have protected yourself. But you risked everything to protect my family." "Why?" Grace felt her own tears begin to fall. "Because it was the right thing to do, sir. And because in this house, I've learned that wealth means nothing if you don't have truth. And truth means nothing if you don't have courage." Victoria stood and walked over. Without a word, she pulled Grace into an embrace, this wealthy woman and this poor housemaid, holding each other while they both wept. "You're not a housemaid anymore," Victoria whispered. "Your family. True family. The kind that stands with you when everything falls apart." The weeks that followed were a blur of police investigations, legal proceedings, and media attention. The man who called himself Raymond was revealed to be Marcus Okonkwo, a former accountant who had embezzled money from multiple companies before disappearing. He had spent years planning this con, his masterpiece, and he would spend many more years in prison for it. The Okafor family recovered their assets, strengthened their security, and most importantly, learned who they could truly trust. Daniel made Grace the family's estate manager with a salary that made her weep. He paid for her to go to school, to finally get the education she had dreamed of. But more than that, he treated her with respect, with gratitude, with love. On a quiet Sunday evening, months after everything had settled, Grace sat on the balcony of her new apartment, looking out over Lagos. She thought about her mother, who used to tell her that goodness always finds its reward, even if the road is long. She thought about how close the Okafors had come to losing everything. And she thought about the strange, mysterious way life works, how a poor housemaid with nothing but her conscience had become the hero of a story no one would have believed. Behind her, her phone buzzed. A message from Blessing: "Grace, Daddy says you should come for dinner. We miss you." Grace smiled. She typed back, "I'll be there." And as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Grace Odola closed her eyes and breathed in the evening air. She had learned something precious in that house of glass and secrets. That courage doesn't come from wealth or power or education. It comes from knowing who you are when no one is watching. And it comes from choosing truth, even when lies would be easier. Especially then. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll past it. Hit that subscribe button and let these stories keep finding you wherever you are in the world. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the greatest treasures are often carried by the humblest hands. Until the next story, stay kind, stay true, and keep believing that goodness still matters. Somewhere, under the same sky we all share, another story is waiting to be told. And maybe, just maybe, you're part of it.